For years, her name was a ghost within royal circles, spoken only in whispers, buried under layers of secrecy and etiquette. She was the woman the palace never mentioned, the one erased so quietly that even those closest to Prince Harry barely remembered her name. But now, the silence has cracked. After years hiding in the shadows, she has spoken. One statement, simple, direct, and devastating, has reignited every question the monarchy worked so hard to bury. Her voice, once dismissed as irrelevant, now echoes through every headline, every social feed, every dinner table conversation across the world. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. No one expected this moment, no one believed she would return. But she did not with scandal or bitterness, but with a truth so sharp it split open the illusion of royal perfection. "I was told to disappear," she said in that recorded interview, "and I did, for a while." Within minutes, clips of her words began circulating online, spreading like wildfire. Hashtags erupted, comment sections filled with speculation. The media, always hungry for a royal confession, swarmed like vultures. Who was she referring to? Who told her to vanish? And more importantly, why now? Her calm tone only deepened the mystery. There was no anger in her words, only something far more haunting: resignation. It was the voice of someone who had carried a secret too long, someone who had seen what the public was never meant to see. Her story wasn't about heartbreak, it was about power, about control, about a system that demanded silence in exchange for protection. And for the first time, that silence had been broken. Those who knew Prince Harry during his younger years remember a version of him untouched by scandal or politics, free, spontaneous, reckless in a charming way. She was part of that version of him long before he became the man the world now debates and dissects. She had seen him before titles, before exile, before pain hardened his smile. And that made her dangerous, because her truth didn't come from gossip, it came from experience. Within hours of the interview's release, the palace reportedly entered what insiders described as containment mode. Calls were made, legal teams were briefed, public relations experts were summoned under the guise of routine communications. Yet, behind closed doors, panic simmered. They knew this wasn't a random outburst, it was a calculated act, one that suggested more revelations could follow. And still, the world couldn't look away. News outlets replayed her words in endless loops, dissecting every syllable. Former aides and commentators speculated endlessly. Was it a coincidence that her timing aligned with whispers of new tensions between Harry and the monarchy? Or was this the first crack in a dam about to burst? Beneath her calm delivery was something deeper, an unspoken promise that there was more to tell. A quiet warning to those who thought her silence meant surrender. For years, she had obeyed, endured, and waited. Now, it was her turn to speak, and the echoes of her voice refused to fade. But her revelation wasn't just about Harry, it hinted at a royal pattern, one that's been quietly repeating for generations. Before Meghan Markle ever entered the picture, there was another story. One that flickered like a candle in the dark corridors of royal life and vanished before the world even noticed it existed. Insiders still whisper about that time, calling it Harry's brief escape from the institution that defined his every breath. They say it was the only period when he seemed truly alive, unburdened, unguarded, and unashamed to be human. She wasn't royal, nor titled, nor trained in palace etiquette. She was simply a girl who made him laugh when the crown's weight became too heavy, who reminded him that there was life beyond obligation. But the flame that once warmed him was destined to be smothered, quietly and efficiently. Back then, Harry was still the spare, the younger son, the one allowed to be reckless as long as he didn't embarrass the firm. He was photographed, leaving clubs, grinning with friends, trying to live a life that wasn't constantly calculated. Beneath that freedom, though, was a loneliness only a few could see. And she saw it instantly. Their paths crossed away from the royal spotlight, far from the staged smiles and choreographed appearances. It began innocently sharing jokes, late-night calls, a friendship that slowly turned into something deeper. But in a world where image was everything, love like that was a liability. They learned to speak in codes, to meet in places where no cameras followed, to craft alibis for afternoons that didn't exist on official calendars. For a time, they lived in their own bubble, a fragile secret that felt invincible. Friends later said they had never seen Harry so at ease, laughing without hesitation, unguarded in a way that felt dangerous for someone born into such scrutiny. But freedom, in royal terms, is never without a price. It started subtly, a warning from an aide, a comment about public perception. Then came the unspoken disapproval, the cold stares, the shifting schedules, the sudden restrictions that made it impossible for them to see each other. He tried to fight it, of course. But the machinery around him was ancient, efficient, and merciless. Every relationship was filtered through a lens of duty. Every feeling was questioned for its impact on the crown. And when the pressure finally peaked, the message was clear. She didn't fit. No public breakup was announced. No official statement was ever given. She simply vanished from his story as though she had never existed at all. Overnight, photographs disappeared, contacts were erased, and her name was quietly removed from the narrative. Even those close to her refused to speak, terrified of what might happen if they did. But behind the silence, there were rumors of late-night phone calls, of Harry begging for one last chance to explain, of tears shed not in public, but behind the locked doors of Kensington Palace. The emotional toll on him was visible, even if no one dared to acknowledge it. His usual spark dulled. The charm that once disarmed everyone turned hollow. He appeared, as one friend described, haunted by something he couldn't say. Many believed he buried that pain under years of rebellion, the wild headlines, the controversies, the desperate attempts to feel alive again. But it wasn't a rebellion, it was grief in disguise. And then came the whispers of interference, how a senior royal allegedly stepped in, citing the reputation of the family. That one phone call ended what could have been his one true escape. She never blamed him, not publicly, not ever. But in her silence, there was always a question left hanging between them. Who truly made the decision to end it? Now, years later, her voice carries that same question, heavier and sharper. Because what she's revealing isn't just about heartbreak. It's about the machinery that ended it, the forces that erased her from his story. And it's that hidden detail, the one erased from every royal biography, that she's now daring to bring back into the light. The world expected gossip, but what it got was far more dangerous. When Harry's ex finally spoke on record, her voice was calm, steady, almost hauntingly composed. But her words carried the weight of something that couldn't be undone. What began as a routine interview quickly turned into a confession that felt like an accusation. An indictment not of Harry, but of the institution that shaped him. She didn't speak like a woman trying to reclaim relevance. She spoke like someone who had been waiting, holding back the truth until the right moment arrived. And when it did, she made sure the world was listening. She began with a sentence that would dominate headlines for days. They made sure I disappeared. The phrase was simple, but its impact was seismic. Within minutes, it was everywhere, quoted, dissected, weaponized. Social media erupted in chaos. Some accused her of lying, others hailed her as brave. But regardless of opinion, one thing was clear: the royal facade had cracked. Her words painted a picture of manipulation and quiet coercion, of a woman pushed out not because she wanted to leave, but because someone, somewhere, decided she had to. She described the warning she'd received before the end of her relationship, a phone call, late at night, from someone close to the Queen. The voice, she said, was polite but firm, laced with authority that left no room for resistance. "It was never a threat," she clarified, "but I understood what it meant. They were protecting the image, not the truth." Her statement had no need for names. The implication alone was enough to send shockwaves through the establishment. The next morning, every major outlet was on fire. Panels debated the implications. Former royal aides denied it all, insisting she misinterpreted a routine conversation. Official palace spokespeople gave carefully worded responses about respecting privacy and refraining from comment. But their silence said more than any denial could. The public could sense that this wasn't the kind of story you could bury. It was alive, pulsing with tension, pulling more secrets to the surface. Behind the polished interviews and official statements, insiders whispered of panic within the palace. Meetings were called in haste. Senior figures argued over how to respond. The word containment was reportedly used again, echoing the same strategies employed decades earlier when another royal woman had broken protocol. But this time, the playbook wasn't working. This wasn't a tabloid scandal. It was a statement of defiance, broadcast in her own voice, with millions watching. As journalists scrambled to dig deeper, one detail became the center of every conversation: the name she refused to reveal. When asked who made that fateful call, she smiled faintly and said only, "You already know who it was." That answer was more devastating than a direct accusation. It fed curiosity, suspicion, and fear. It left the public to fill in the blanks, and the blanks became the palace's worst nightmare. And then came the whispers of evidence. Screenshots, emails, letters. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. Just enough smoke to make the world believe there was fire. Commentators began calling it the statement that shattered protocol because it did something few ever dared. It exposed the invisible hand behind royal relationships, the system that chose who was acceptable and who was expendable. But it wasn't just her, because what she described next was something the monarchy has been accused of before. Every royal crisis follows the same pattern: charm the public, control the narrative. Then, when the storm grows too loud, go silent. It's the same playbook that's been used for generations, fine-tuned through decades of scandal and secrecy. From Diana's cries for help to Meghan's accusations of isolation, the same machinery seems to move quietly in the background, smooth, precise, and merciless. And now, with Harry's ex finally speaking, the system that once operated in shadows is suddenly exposed to daylight. Her words didn't just challenge the royal institution, they pulled back the curtain on the mechanism that protects it. She called it containment. Not censorship, not denial, containment. A method of keeping problems from becoming public long enough for the palace to reshape them. It's not about suppressing stories entirely, it's about rewriting them before they spread. Those close to the royal communications team have described it for years without ever naming it. The quiet phone calls to editors, the subtle withdrawals of press passes, the reminders that access comes with cooperation. But this time, the process didn't work as planned. The silence she endured, the sudden disappearance, the vanishing photographs, it all now looked less like coincidence and more like orchestration. When her story went public, journalists began revisiting old archives, articles mysteriously pulled before publication, gossip columns abruptly retracted, stories verified one day and denied the next. It was as though her name had been erased in real time. And then came the leaks. Screenshots, allegedly from internal emails. Memos marked private circulation. They hinted at a coordinated effort to neutralize her presence from the royal narrative altogether. One email, allegedly from a senior aide, used a chilling phrase: "The situation is under control. She won't speak." But she did, and that act alone cracked the system open. The palace, of course, denied everything. Official spokespeople dismissed the allegations as distorted memories. Loyal insiders accused her of seeking attention, but outside those gilded walls, public opinion began to shift. People started to notice the patterns, the same language used whenever a royal woman fell out of favor, the sudden change in headlines, the carefully planted sources, the emotional exhaustion disguised as personal choice. To the public, it began to feel too familiar. The pattern was no longer subtle, it was systemic. And at the heart of that system stood Harry, torn between loyalty and truth. At the time of her disappearance, those closest to him said his circle was fractured. Some begged him to stay quiet to protect the institution that had defined his life. Others urged him to confront it, to finally speak about what he'd seen and heard. But Harry's silence then wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Because deep down, he knew that once the playbook was revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. As the investigation into her claims deepened, new names surfaced: advisors, communications chiefs, even former security staff. Some refused to comment, others quietly left their posts. And through it all, the palace held its ground unmoved, unshaken, as if denial itself were tradition. Yet, the cracks were showing. Each leaked message, each half-hearted response felt like proof that something was unraveling from within. What made it worse was her calm certainty. She never raised her voice, never accused directly, never sensationalized. She didn't need to. Her composure made her claims even more believable. And while the institution tried to project control, the public could sense the tension, the fear that this time, the narrative might slip beyond their grasp. Because when Harry found out what she'd said, he didn't deny it, he disappeared. For 72 hours after her interview aired, Prince Harry vanished from sight. No public appearances, no official statements, not even a casual photograph or a whisper from his inner circle. The man who had once been the most accessible royal suddenly went dark. The press lost track of his movements. His staff stopped answering calls. His friends claimed they had no idea where he was. For a family built on image and presence, his silence felt louder than any speech he could have given. It wasn't just absence, it was intent. Speculation exploded overnight. Some claimed he had gone into hiding at a private retreat in California. Others swore a private jet had been spotted, leaving Los Angeles under his name, bound for London. Conspiracy theorists said it was both that he'd orchestrated the confusion to keep everyone guessing. But beneath the noise, one fact remained undisputed. Harry had disappeared at the very moment the royal family most needed him to speak, to clarify, to control, to defend. Yet he said nothing. And that silence terrified both sides. Those close to Meghan were said to be deeply concerned. Not because he had gone quiet, but because she knew that when Harry went quiet, it meant something was brewing. Meghan, according to one insider, had seen this version of him before, the one who doesn't react in anger but moves in calculation. Behind palace gates, however, his disappearance set off alarm bells. Meetings were called. Advisors briefed the king on the growing crisis. Every outlet wanted a royal response, but without Harry, there was none to give. The narrative slipped further out of control with each passing hour. Inside the institution, some believed he was regrouping. Others whispered that his silence was strategic and that he was preparing his own counterstrike. A former aide allegedly told reporters, "He's furious, but not at her." That line became the headline everywhere, sparking speculation that Harry's anger was aimed higher, deeper, at the very people who had orchestrated the silence years ago. It wasn't betrayal he was processing, it was recognition. The realization that she had finally spoken the truth he'd spent years trying to bury. Sources close to the couple hinted that he had been working on something quietly for months, a statement of his own, though not the kind spoken to cameras. Those same sources claimed he had written a private letter, addressed directly to the palace, days before the interview even aired. What it contained remained a mystery. But what made the story impossible to ignore was what came next. A journalist from a major British outlet reported receiving a tip from an anonymous staffer inside the royal offices. A sealed letter, bearing Harry's initials, had been delivered by courier the morning after the interview with no signature, no sender's name. The palace confirmed nothing, denied everything, but insiders whispered that its contents had sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the family. Because this wasn't just another royal love story turned scandal. It was beginning to feel like something far more deliberate. Every move, every silence, every leak seemed to fit into a pattern no one could fully trace. For the first time, the palace wasn't just managing a rumor, it was reacting to one. And somewhere, in the middle of it all, Harry was still missing. Watching the fire he didn't start, but now had every reason to control. And when that letter surfaced, it didn't just confirm her story, it reignited an old royal scandal buried for decades. There's a reason her words cut so deep. For those who remembered the past, they carried a chilling familiarity and echo of the same warnings Princess Diana once tried to give. The same phrasing, the same tone of fear, dressed as composure. They protect their image, not their people. Those who had lived through the tragedy of Diana's downfall felt an old wound reopen. The pattern was too precise to ignore. The silencing, the manipulation, rewriting the truth before the world could see it. It wasn't just déjà vu, it was a haunting reminder that history within the royal family doesn't repeat itself because it never stops. It just changes names. For Harry, that realization struck with the force of lightning. His mother's shadow had followed him his entire life, but this was different. His ex's words mirrored the same quiet terror Diana once carried. The same struggle between love and duty, between truth and survival. As he listened to the recordings of her interview, people close to him said he went completely still, as if transported back to those endless nights as a child, watching his mother's face on the news, painted as fragile, unstable, dangerous. He'd spent years believing that her suffering was the price of being too open. Now he began to wonder if it had simply been the price of being truthful. In those 72 hours of silence, as speculation mounted about his disappearance, insiders say he revisited every memory he had tried to lock away. The phone calls that were never answered, letters his mother wrote to friends predicting something would happen to her, the way her voice cracked when she said she was trapped in a system that doesn't change. Those same words were now resurfacing through someone else's voice, someone who had loved him once and was now caught in the same cycle of suppression. The symmetry was unbearable. And then came the revelation that changed everything. The ex allegedly possessed one of Diana's personal letters, a handwritten note given to her through an old friend of the family. It wasn't just sentimental, it was prophetic. In that letter, Diana had written that they would never allow her sons to live freely once they began to see how the institution truly worked. If the letter was real, it would be proof that Diana foresaw the very pattern repeating itself decades before her son lived it. That letter, according to whispers, was what the palace feared most. Not the interview, not the headlines, but the ghost of a mother who refused to stay silent, even from the grave. Those close to Harry said the discovery shattered him. He wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken. Everything he had tried to escape the rules, the control, the endless manipulation was still alive, breathing beneath the same crown that once crushed his mother's spirit. His silence after the interview was not retreat, but reflection. He was standing on a line only he could see, the same one Diana had crossed when she chose truth over loyalty. And when the palace realized he wasn't denying her words, panic began to set in. Advisors tried to reach him, urging caution, warning him that any move now could ignite a storm the monarchy might not survive. But for Harry, the decision had already been made. He had spent his entire life watching women he loved be broken by silence. He wouldn't let it happen again. He didn't want revenge. He wanted release. From the secrets, from history, from the endless repetition of pain. The past had already taken his mother, and it was reaching for another woman he once loved. For the first time in years, Harry stopped thinking like a prince and started thinking like a son. The echoes of Diana were no longer just memories. They were marching orders. But when Harry decided to answer her, he didn't call a reporter. He called her. No cameras, no aides, no carefully worded statements drafted by palace officials or publicists. Just a private phone call between two people who once loved each other, now standing on opposite sides of a global storm. Neither had intended to start. The call lasted less than 30 minutes, but in those 30 minutes, years of silence broke open like a fault line. What was said has never been fully released, but the leaked snippets were enough to change everything. Enough to show Harry was not angry. He was afraid, not for himself, but for what might come next. The tone of that conversation, insiders say, was hauntingly calm. No shouting, no blame, only exhaustion. The kind that comes from knowing that what's been set in motion can no longer be undone. According to one source, Harry's voice trembled as he told her, "You shouldn't have said it, but I understand." It wasn't an accusation, it was a confession. A quiet acknowledgement that she had spoken aloud what he had been too afraid to admit himself. She apologized, not for telling the truth, but for the timing, for the chaos it unleashed, for putting him in a position where silence now carried consequences. Yet even in her regret, there was relief. The truth was finally out, and she was free from the weight of pretending it never happened. But Harry's words carried something colder, something that made her realize the danger was no longer theoretical. "They're watching everything now," he told her. That single sentence was reportedly followed by a long silence. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that lingers when both people know the gravity of what's at stake. The "they" he referred to didn't need clarification. In royal language, "they" meant the institution, the apparatus that sees all, controls all, and never forgives those who break its code. Harry had grown up within that system. He knew exactly how it retaliated, not with public fury, but with quiet destruction. What he feared wasn't exposure, it was retaliation disguised as coincidence. The subtle dismantling of reputations, the leaks to the press, the isolation that follows anyone who speaks too loudly. He warned her not to trust anyone who suddenly wanted to help manage the story. He told her not to meet certain journalists, not to respond to messages that seemed too coordinated. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. And she listened, realizing that the game she thought she'd escaped was still being played, only now with higher stakes. Leaked reports suggest she told him she didn't regret speaking out, only that she wished he had been beside her when she did. His response, reportedly quiet and fractured, was, "You know why I couldn't." Those 6 words summed up everything. The love that still lingered, the duty that still chained him, and the fear that had shaped both of their lives. The call ended not with closure, but with understanding, 2 people acknowledging that their truth came at a cost neither had anticipated. But before they hung up, she said something that would later unsettle even those who had dismissed her as delusional. "I haven't told them everything," she whispered. "Not yet." And then she ended the call. And then, in her follow-up interview, she dropped the final bombshell, one that no royal supporter could ignore. The world thought she'd said it all. Her first interview had sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, dividing public opinion and forcing the royal family into an uncomfortable silence. But when she returned for a second statement, no one was prepared for what came next. This time, her tone was darker, more defiant, more deliberate. She wasn't just breaking her silence anymore, she was dismantling the story the monarchy had spent years constructing. And in the space of one chilling sentence, she shifted the conversation from scandal to legacy. According to her, there was something Harry had once confessed, something that could destroy what's left of the monarchy's credibility. She didn't elaborate, not directly, But she didn't have to. Every word was calculated, every pause heavy with implication. "There was a deal," she said softly. "A deal made long before Meghan ever arrived." That single line was enough to ignite a global storm. Commentators, journalists, even former palace aides began scrambling to interpret what she meant. A deal between whom? What kind of agreement could be powerful enough to shake the monarchy to its core? Theories began to spread like wildfire. Some claimed she was referring to a secret financial arrangement, money exchanged to keep certain details of Harry's youth from reaching the press. Others whispered about an affair buried deep within the archives of royal history. One that, if revealed, could redraw family lines and redefine legitimacy. But those closest to the palace suspected something far more damning. An institutional cover-up that predated Meghan, Diana, and even the modern royal brand itself. It wasn't just about Harry. It was about how the crown protected itself, no matter the cost. Her second statement came with an edge of exhaustion, but also purpose. "I stayed silent because I thought I was protecting him," she said. "Now I realize I was protecting them." Those words detonated across social media like a bomb. Within hours, international networks were running special reports, while the palace remained locked in its most disciplined form of denial. Total silence. But that silence only amplified her voice. People began demanding answers. Politicians called for transparency. Former courtiers hinted off-record that crisis meetings were being held in secret. The system that had thrived on control was suddenly surrounded by chaos. Behind the scenes, pressure campaigns began again. Only this time, they were more aggressive. Anonymous emails warning her to stop feeding the fire. Unexplained delays in her media appearances. Leaked stories about her credibility that seemed too conveniently timed. It was clear the palace machinery was in motion again, spinning furiously to reclaim control of a narrative slipping through its fingers. But, unlike before, she didn't retreat. Her calm defiance only strengthened her supporters, who saw her as the first person to challenge the crown's moral authority from the outside and win the public's attention by doing it. And then came the most unsettling twist of all. Whispers that Meghan might know the full truth. A royal correspondent claimed that in private, Meghan had alluded to things Harry never wanted to say on camera. Insiders hinted that this unspoken secret had caused deep fractures within the Sussexes' marriage and shaped their decision to leave royal life altogether. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about one woman's courage. It was about how far the royal family's reach extended and who else was willing to defy it. For the first time, the monarchy found itself in a battle it couldn't control. A war of truth, perception, and power fought in the open. Her revelation had transformed what was once seen as a personal tragedy into something far more dangerous, an institutional reckoning. Every denial, every silence, every redacted memory now seemed like proof of guilt. And if what she hinted at was real, then the very foundations of the crown could crumble under its own weight. Because this wasn't just another royal controversy, it was a declaration of war on the crown's version of truth. As the dust begins to settle, one thing is certain: this story is far from over. The palace gates may be closed, but they can't contain the storm brewing behind them. The world has moved beyond curiosity now. It's hunger for answers, for truth, for accountability. The monarchy, once untouchable, finds itself cornered by its own silence. Every minute without a statement feels deliberate. Every refusal to deny feels like an admission. But in the rarefied air of royal control, silence is never just silence. It's strategy. This time, it may not be enough. Global reaction has been unlike anything the crown has seen in modern times. Some hail Harry's ex as a heroine, calling her brave for speaking out against a system built on quiet suffering. Others accuse her of betrayal, painting her as the spark that could burn centuries of legacy to ash. But whether loved or hated, she's become impossible to ignore. Her words have transcended gossip, they've turned into evidence. Every talk show, every front page, every viral thread debates the same haunting question. What exactly was the deal she hinted at, and who benefited from it? Inside the royal walls, panic whispers through corridors polished by denial. Private meetings stretch late into the night. Statements are drafted and rejected. Legal teams and advisors debate whether to defend or deflect. For a family that thrives on stability, this level of internal chaos is unprecedented. Reports hint at investigations launched quietly, not into her claims, but into who failed to stop her from making them public. It's no longer damage control, it's about survival. Because for the first time, the monarchy isn't just battling scandal, it's fighting for its own credibility. Questions that were once dismissed as conspiracy are now resurrected with urgency. Was Harry's disappearance truly voluntary? Did the letter he sent contain the warning she alluded to? And what of Diana's letter? Does it still exist? And if so, who holds it now? Each mystery feels intertwined, part of a larger truth that can no longer be buried beneath protocol. Even loyalists within the palace can sense that the old tools of distraction and denial aren't working anymore. The public has seen behind the curtain, and they won't unsee it. Abroad, world leaders and institutions that once fawned over the crown now keep a calculated distance. American and European outlets treat the monarchy not as a symbol of tradition, but as an institution in crisis. Even the Commonwealth nations, long tied by history and allegiance, begin questioning the relevance of loyalty to a house built on secrecy. The divide between admiration and outrage widens daily, and somewhere in between stands Harry, silent, unseen, and perhaps planning his own reckoning. But amidst the chaos, one truth cuts through the noise. This was never just about love, betrayal, or revenge. It's about power, the kind that shapes narratives and silences voices. And now that power is trembling. What began as one woman's truth has become a global confrontation between myth and reality, between the crown and its conscience. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that silence in the royal family never lasts forever.